Hello. What am I talking about today? I'm talking about the Obsessive Father's Heroic Homecoming. Uh, I'll say this. Title's weird. I'm not really sure if it's meant to be from this character's perspective. I think it is, but that's not the main character, so weird. Um, it's also not an isekai, so yeah, take that for what you will. If you haven't seen these videos before, what do? Well, I am going to give you a rating off the bat, and then I'm going to go into why I gave it that rating. Not really going to get into any spoilers or anything, I'm just going to give you the general vibe of the series and whether or not you should read it. For this series, you know, I think depending on the person, it could be anywhere between a 7 and an 8. I think it kind of depends on your tastes. If you want to know why it's between those two, you can go, and watch the rest of the video. If you don't really care, then there you go. Alright. So what's the gist? Well, let's start with the main character. I'm gonna go through the main characters, and then I'll kind of explain some of the plot points and whatnot, and why I like or dislike them. This is the main character for the most part. She's fine. Kind of naive, but I think emotionally speaking, I can kind of get why she's doing the things she does, even if the decisions she makes are, probably not ideal. The gist is she has a daughter with the male lead, right before he has to go to war. So, as he's leaving, she finds out, oh, I have his child. And then throughout the time that he's in war, at war, which is I think 7-ish year period, she finds out that's kind of when she finds out she's actually pregnant. It's right after he leaves. And during that time, she is told that he's dead. Turns out he's not dead, and that's where the conflict comes in. As far as her character goes, I feel like there's really not much there other than I don't know, kind of just wanting the best for her kid, which is sweet. I wouldn't say it's wholly unique, and I don't necessarily think it stands out in terms of all these kinds of series, but hey, whatever, it's sweet. If you have a little bit of a sweet tooth going on, you might like this series. But yeah, she just cares about her child. When her husband, well, technically not her husband, but when the child's father comes back, she's a bit, surprised, considering she thought he was, X'd off, right? She thought he was dead. And it's the conflict of the series is basically her dealing with that, him wanting to still be with her, but she's, I thought you were dead for so long, and all this crap, and why did this happen, and blah blah blah, and it's okay, that's the main gist. I guess if I'm making some notes on why I dislike or like her character, well, I feel like it's a little annoying, right? He goes off to war, and she expects, letters to come back, and, all that, but there's some issues with the pipeline, and he ends up getting declared as dead because he falls into a ravine at some point and almost dies. But the idea is he makes a pact with a dragon, and that keeps him alive, and then that's how he comes back. But they never resolve that death, so she thinks he's dead for this long, and all of his letters to her are getting cut off, for probably some nefarious reason, right? That's not necessarily something I'm going to talk about in this video. And that's all well and good, but when he does come back and he says oh, I am alive and I can't believe all these letters are cut off, and she finds out yeah, the letters are getting cut off from an outside third party, and they tell her yeah, that's probably what happened. And he clearly still cares about her and everything, but then she's oh, you're I don't like you, I don't want to be around you, and all this stuff, and it's I don't know, it's hard for me to, I understand from an emotional level that she's probably just I don't love you anymore, it just doesn't exist, so leave me alone and all that, but I also understand from his perspective, I mean, before he left, he loved her, and he didn't necessarily know that these letters are being cut off, so when he comes back, he would expect her to still, want to be with him, but then he, child and everything. But then and you would think like, oh, maybe the conflict is like he, is wondering who this child is from and who did, she go out with. But in reality, she instantly tells him like, oh, it's your kid. But then she's surprised when he keeps showing up and staying around, and it's like, well, I mean, it is his kid. And of course, in the story's context, it's because he wants to be back with her, but you would think from her perspective, it's like, well, yeah, it is his kid. So of course he'd want to be, around and a part of her life. It's like, So I find it a little bit like a lot of the conflict in the story is basically just her not wanting to be objective. But I also understand, like, there's an emotional level here, where, like, how can you get around this emotion, where it's like he didn't help you all this time and you thought he was dead and now he's just coming back and thinking everything's going to go back to normal. I get it. And she was starting to make a new relationship during that time, even though I will say, I'm not going to go into depth with that, but the new relationship that she happens to be making has some negative undertones, let's say. But yeah, I think there's intrigue here in terms of her personality and her situation, but I do think it's a little silly at times because the conflict is built solely based on, I would say, emotional decisions. Which, excuse me. It's based on emotional decisions, which is a little bit silly to me. I don't know. But, hey, whatever. Something you like it, and I don't really have to, fault you on that. I find it a little annoying when all the conflict is based on emotional decisions and not objective things that make a conflict occur, but hey, whatever. As far as, like, other prominent characters, her daughter's around, yes, but she's kind of just, like, a plot device. Not really that useful in any sort of framework, I would say. Of course, there's the male lead who, is obsessive, to say the least. The implications are because he made a pact with, like, the whole, like, he made the pact with the whole dragon thing, which, because he made the pact with the dragon, there's this sense like he has to be with a particular person to maintain his, sanity and powers in this world. Which, I mean, it's a fine idea. It's a little conflated because he doesn't necessarily have to be with her, but hey, whatever. I think he's likable, to say the least. I think he's a little cold and everything, but I feel like he has good intentions and he clearly does care for her. He does sometimes have some, like, thoughts where you're like, that's a little problematic. I have issues there, but hey, whatever. He doesn't necessarily act on any of those, so I can't necessarily claim it. It's like if someone thought of, like, killing somebody, but they didn't do it. It's like, can you really say that they're a murderer? No. But still, it's a little bit of a red herring, I'm not going to lie. But yeah, I mean, he's fine. I don't have any issues with the male lead, per se. He's okay. I guess the last thing would just be, like, other prominent characters. Of course, her, new romantic partner's a thing, but, there's... I can't really go into that without spoiling things, but there are some nefarious elements to that I think are kind of interesting and a little bit intriguing. So he's someone to note. As far as other characters, I mean, well, there's, like, a plot line of the Emperor giving this guy, like, a... because he is a... he made a pact with a dragon, the Emperor really puts a lot of stock in him and gives him, like, the permission to, marry this, girl, even though he would prefer him be with the princess. So there's some elements there where, like, she gets summoned and we get to see, like, conflict and, like, how the nobles treat her and everything. But that's not necessarily unique. I've seen that in other series before, so I'm not really going to say that's a positive. It's just kind of, like, fine, it's done fine. It's okay. I don't have any issues with that. I would say there's a lot of unlikable characters that come up because of that, but it's not necessarily something that I really care about that much. It's fine. Um, I will say they go to like the capital, and I think it's like way too like crazy into being like everyone's horrible. I feel like in reality, like there's a sense of like reality, right, where like it is just the reality is just not making it here. It is not making it to this capital. Everyone's like a terrible person. They're all awful. It's just like Jesus Christ, like what? These people just suck. Um, there's also like unrealistic things, like the Emperor is like, you know, he called her, but then like he says like, oh, you screwed up and you didn't come and do all this stuff, and it's like, well, but she did. I don't know. It's all a little bit silly to me when it gets to the capital. Before that, I find it mildly interesting. Like we see her interactions with this guy's like mother, for example, and like them stepmother, like and her like she's not married, but it's akin to a stepmother situation. But you know, this guy's mother ends up liking her after they think that he died, and they kind of feel like, you know, that grief together, and it's like, oh, that's kind of interesting to see like that like relationship he flipped on its head, where like she actually seems to like her to some degree. But yeah, I mean, it's a little convoluted once you get to like the whole capital situation. I don't know. Overall, I think it's a fine series. I enjoy most of it. I guess to end this, I'll give you the old SAE. What is the SAE? Well, it's story, art, enjoyment. Story-wise, I think there are some like major, like I wouldn't want to say plot holes, but they're just confusing choices. And it's kind of it's a lot of it is based on emotional decisions, which I don't necessarily enjoy that much. So I can't necessarily say I give it the highest marks in terms of story. Like, for me, it's probably a 6, but I think it could go anywhere up to an 8, depending on what you like. As far as art goes, I mean, it looks fine. I'd give it like a 7. It's not, like, gross or anything, but it's also not necessarily doing anything well, and all the characters are relatively basic in designs, but I will say the main character, it's a little bit of a different look. The, you know, greenish blue eyes as well as, you know, brown hair. It's not necessarily that typical, but the male lead is kind of typical, so it kind of counteracts that, but whatever. I'll give it a 7 for art. It's fine. Enjoyment, I mean, I think for the most part I liked it. Like, I think the story does bog it down at times, but there's enough moments outside that, you know, allow me to probably get it up to like a 7. So I think, yeah, depending on what you like, it could be like an 8. I think for me, it would be fair to give it a 7. I think it's, you know, it's fine. I don't hate it or anything, but it doesn't necessarily stand out to me at all. It's just, it's alright. I don't have any issues with it. If it's the kind of story you like, you know, if you don't mind that whole emotionally driven plot thing, then hey, you might like this. Alright. I think that's about it. I'd appreciate if you could like, comment, subscribe, blah, blah, blah. You know, maybe leave another story that you want me to talk about or whatever down below. You know, even if I didn't read it, you know, even if I have read it, I'll read it again. It doesn't really matter. I have time. Yeah, I'll see ya.